It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing Othello, Nemesis, Taikyoku Renju, Bases Loaded, and Flipull. Let's start the show.
Now you're ready for Othello.
A game?
Othello is a game of the mind. You surround your piece and make it mine.
What a great game! I learned it in a minute!
Othello takes a minute to learn and a lifetime to master.
Othello DMG-OT, developed by Sukuda Original and published by Nintendo in Europe and Kawada in Japan. A minute to learn, a lifetime to master. Tragic is the existence that's forced to dedicate their lifetime to mastering Othello. Sukuda Original are a reasonably obscure development company, more well known for toy production, who can be traced back long before the Game Boy. They licensed a version of the board game Reversi as far back as 1973 in Japan, and were the first company to tack on the name Othello, based very loosely on the Shakespeare work. Not much else came from these guys. They just really liked Reversi, I guess. Each player places either black or white discs on an 8x8 checkerboard, one at a time, so that one or more existing discs are bounded on either end of a straight line with your colour disc. All tiles in between your two discs can then be flipped over to your colour, with the objective being to have the most discs flipped to your colour once all 64 spaces have been filled, or until no more moves can be made. A very simple premise for a board game, but there are plenty of strategies and subtleties that you'll pick up on the more you play. As a human versus human game, this serves a way to pass a rainy afternoon round your grandparents' house, if you've watched that VHS of Tom and Jerry twice already, and the deck of cards only has 51 in it. Played against someone of a similar skill level, it could even be quite fun. But put yourself up against very early 90s AI, however, and it's a different story. The AI is far too tough to be accessible to the average player. You can seem to be doing all right, only for the opponent to stun-lock you into repeatedly having no possible moves, while they quickly take over the whole board. Never yet have I won a round of Othello. There are several CPUs to choose from, but I don't think it makes a difference. They're all pretty solid. I'm perhaps mere prattle without practice, but I'm not about to dedicate a great deal of time to learning this. It's just not interesting enough as a concept. It's a good idea to put a time limit on, because the AI can sometimes take an eternity to come up with a move. Due to the almost endless number of placement possibilities, it's meaningless to plan more than a move or two ahead, so don't think you can use this time for strategy. The sound effects and music exist, but you'll probably wish they didn't. That tune is 12 seconds long. It's not as if they were saving cart space for the vast amounts of programming that this thing must have taken. Surely a little variation would have been reasonable. Graphically, it's nothing pretty, but I suppose it doesn't have to be. The character faces, especially the human-controlled players, look pretty ridiculous. Perhaps it's because I'm not 8 or 80 years old, but I don't like this board game. The Game Boy rendition in and of itself is faithful, but I should rather drown cats and blind puppies. If you really want to play a board game on your Game Boy, there's Monopoly, or even Scrabble, both of which are great fun. Hell, even Chessmaster is decent enough. This one sucks. Apparently, there's a World Championship Othello event, if you can believe such a thing. Hurl my soul from heaven and fiends snatch at it, if life's not just too damn short.
コナミゲームボーイソフト手のひらで戦闘が始まるグラディウスシリーズ変革シンキングネメシス好評発売中
Nemesis DMG-NM, developed and published by Konami. Ah, Konami. Wow, they were good in the 80s, weren't they? Well, alright, Nemesis was technically released in the 90s, but they were pretty great then too. Forget the self-destructive bridge burning that constitutes their current praxis, and be grateful for the fact that some of the most wonderful franchises of all time, certainly on Nintendo consoles, were given breath by the esteemed minds of Konami's old guard. Gradius is a series that certainly stands shoulder to shoulder with the other greats like Contra and Castlevania. Nemesis, largely based on Gradius on the NES, marks the first of Konami's iconic space shooters on the Game Boy, and it can proudly stand at the side of its bigger brothers, even outshining some of them. You probably already know the premise of this game. You control a spaceship with unlimited and upgradable weaponry against a baffling and ever more powerful army of antagonists, which, upon death, can drop icons to collect. The traditional set of power-ups are there: speed increases, ground-seeking missiles, a double shot, lasers, option, which generates up to 2 invulnerable orbs of light that mimic your movements and attacks, and shields, which allow you to take a few hits before dissipating. Every seasoned Gradius player has their own techniques on which power-ups to prioritize, but in the early stages there are so many drops to collect that you won't need to. Nevertheless, I find that you only need one speed boost. More than one can make movement a bit imprecise, in fact. After which, max out those ground missiles. There are lots of pesky enemies that live down there that are tough to hit without crashing into the scenery. Yeah, that happens here, I'm afraid. The static objects will kill you as much as the bad guys do at first. That's alright though, it instills precision in the player. After that's done, get those lasers going and get the 2 option orbs following you. Now all that's left is to get the shields up and play the dodge the drop game, where you keep the grayed out F box highlighted to reactivate your shields as soon as you lose them, while trying to avoid picking up any further drops, causing the meter to annoyingly cycle to the start. There are 2 game difficulties. In option 1, the enemies are often more like obstacles than aggressors, rarely firing at you. Most go down with 1 hit. No hitting the 5 stages is the order of the day here, and with a few tries you shouldn't have much problem at least getting to the last stage without losing a ship. If you do die on these later stages though, prepare to have your Vic Vipers handed to you. Your ship is gutted down to the bare bones, with little chance to get back to full strength. You can get to a certain point at full power without dying, only to lose all the lives you've accumulated because you can't re-attain that strength. Shoot-'em-up veterans should be used to this, and know all too well the added pressure not to die that this creates. This is doubly pertinent if you try the harder difficulty. Get good in option 1, really good, because if you're sadistic enough to try option 2, you'll need to be. That secret level, hidden halfway through stage 2, will look like the City of Willows if you make it that far. If I have a notable problem with the game, it's that possibly the easy mode is too easy and the hard mode is just too hard. A middle setting would have been perfect for those who, like me, are by no means experts, but certainly not newcomers. After a left-right auto-scrolling level, complete with the traditional swarms of aliens, pericaryon-like cell things, and the good old Cheerio-spewing Moai heads, there's often a short endurance test before the boss fights. These cannot be beaten, but merely have to be survived. Towards the end of stage 1, 2 volcanoes erupt violently, spewing rocks about the place. There are others where enemies encroach from all sides, needing to be destroyed for a predetermined time period. After these come the huge bosses. These look amazing, often taking up the whole screen. There's nothing you haven't seen before in a Gradius title. The pulsating cores pinpoint where you need to strike at them. The detail in these massive sprites is really impressive, and the destruction animations demonstrated one of the earliest examples of the layering techniques that artists used to push the minimalist technology to its fullest. The backgrounds are richly detailed too, and there's also one of the earliest uses of parallax scrolling on the system. There can be tons of sprites on screen, but you don't get a great deal of flicker, an admirable achievement. A wide variety of sounds are utilised, with some great sci-fi explosions and laser blasts. That glorious music isn't forgotten, and could well be the best music on the system up to this point. Listen with headphones to hear some trippy stereophonics, and a lovely low end that dispelled the notion that the Game Boy's sound bank was nothing more than a tinny, annoying little bleep machine. The composition really is that good. It and the sound effects complement each other well, without one dominating the other. A really accomplished audible work. There wasn't exactly an abundance of games in this genre on the Game Boy, but its strength lies in the quality of the titles that did come out. While later reviews will determine if Nemesis is the best shoot-'em-up on the system, it's definitely the best up to where we are now, and indeed for a little while yet. Prime your trigger finger though. 1991 and 1992 were darn good years for what proved to be one of the Game Boy's strongest areas. What a time to be alive. Taikyoku Renju, DMG-TCA, developed and published by Toa Chiki. Another variation of a two-player counters game, Taikyoku Renju could perhaps be most closely compared to Connect 4 or Noughts and Crosses. The title, to the best of my knowledge, translates as Connecting Pearls Game, which should give a rough idea of what's going on. Here, the premise is very simple. Connect 5 of your counters in a straight row, either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, somewhere on a 15 by 15 board. Unlike Connect 4, where you have to drop counters downwards, you can play a piece anywhere on the board, connected to others or not, so long as it's not a preoccupied space. You take it in turns placing a piece until either player has 5 in a row, or 100 pieces have been placed. It seems like an incredibly simple concept, and it is, but like all the best board games, often the most straightforward rule sets lead to the most captivating of games. I enjoy the opening game idea you get with Renju. Player 1 must place 2 black counters and 1 white in a suitable opening pattern. The second player then gets to decide which colour they want to play as based on this opening pattern. It takes away any conceived advantage of playing first, as well as adding an extra little flavour of strategy to the game. As well as this, playing as the black counters has a few other minor rule drawbacks, such as not being able to create 2 groups of 3 at any one time. As you'd expect, there are plenty of tricks and manoeuvres you can figure out along your way. A fun game to play against another human, or one of the 3 CPU difficulties. Also, there are preset layouts that throw you into the midst of an ongoing game. It's lovely when you don't need a rulebook to learn something, especially when it's a Japanese exclusive, although if you did feel like actually reading the game, you can. This marks the first example of a Game Boy game where you can choose the language at the start. Sure, there's minimal translation needed, but it's a nice gesture all the same. You can choose from 4 different songs as your in-game music, which again is an appreciated gesture, but you'll probably get tired of all of them in short order. The sound doesn't add anything here, but it's not needed. Taikyoku Renju is as simplistic as it gets, while remaining a pretty good way of killing half an hour. Recommended import.
Batteries and Tetris included? Amazing! Nintendo word.
Bases Loaded, DMG-BK, developed by Toze and published by Jalico. Let's give this another try, shall we? Sports games are often hit and miss on 8-bit systems, and the Game Boy seems to house a lot of poor ones. At least, off the top of my head, I can think of more strikeouts than home runs. But that's one of the aims of this book, to give these things due time and attention to see if my initial prejudices are fair and or accurate. After the shocking mess that was Nintendo's Baseball, we have another NES port, Bases Loaded. Similarly, you can choose USA or Japan mode, the only discernible difference being the names of your players. A marked improvement that you'll notice straight away is the pace of the game. The ball and fielders move at a more realistic pace, and it's actually possible to catch a hitter out by using skill. Crazy concept, right? Once a fielder has it, throwing to your base of choice is intuitive. Treat the bases as cardinal directions. First is right, second up, and so on. Press that direction and hit A, and the fielder will attempt to throw to the guy on that base. It's a reasonable way of getting someone out, which is what you want to be able to do in baseball. Seems like a daft point to make, but remember, I've just played baseball, so I can't take these things for granted. When pitching, you get to see from the pitcher's point of view, and it doesn't look horrible. You can put various spins on the throw, away or towards the batsman. There's a weird corkscrew shot that the computer does sometimes, but I've not worked out how to emulate that. It's hard to hit, and a nailed-on strike. Managing to strike the ball is not so much skill or planning, but being able to hit that timing sweet spot. You'll figure out what that is. You can also bunt the ball, +1 for actual sports research, where you hold the bat out in front of you for a guaranteed hit. The ball will just land in front of your batsman, leaving the fielders no time to throw to a base before your teammates can run on one. It's a good way to get players round if you're running low on strikes. Bases loaded is a much better attempt at baseball, for sure. But if there's a complaint, it's that it's still too hard. The graphics are nice enough, but the sound is too generic and a little grating. It's a fun game that you can actually play and get into. The tension of trying to reach the base before the ball is definitely there, which, at its most base, is what you want from a baseball game. Really good effort. I have to address the elephant in the room. It would be remiss of me to leave this out of the review. When the fielders get the ball, what are they doing? It can only be one thing, and it's indecent. Graphics point off for being disgusting, but comedy point on for at least being synchronized. Flipull DMG-FP, developed and published by Taito Corporation. Block puzzle games are certainly not in short supply on the Game Boy, and not without reason. A great one doesn't need to look, flash, or sound amazing, but can be simple one-screen affairs with straightforward rule sets and head-scratching strategy. In Flipull, you control a teardrop-shaped blob thing that throws out different blocks at a pile of other blocks, in order to try to clear a certain number of them out. There are 4 designs on the blocks which need to be matched to the one you're throwing. You cast each one horizontally, and any matching blocks in consecutive order will be removed, and the next different block will fly into your character's hands to be your next move. It's sometimes possible to drop blocks vertically depending on the shape of the ceiling, which allows you to clear vertical lines instead. The levels are all based in a 12 by 12 grid, with different arrangements of indestructible blocks to rebound off. The rest of the screen shows you the maximum number of blocks that you can have left when all possible moves have gone, as well as how many are left. There's also a score and a pretty generous time limit. Well, it depends how much thought you want to put into your sequence of moves. If you try to think 3 or 4 steps ahead, which is harder than it sounds until you get used to how blocks are removed, then 3 or so minutes per stage can get pretty tight. Often you'll be left with no visible blocks of the same design to the one you're holding. If this happens, you have a limited amount of super blocks that can remove anything. Use these wisely though, as they're hard to come by, and if you have no available moves or S-blocks, it's game over. There are a small handful of continues, and no password system or save. This is a big problem with the game. It's not easy by any means, and layouts are random, so you can't even learn the stages. This does increase replayability, but with 50 levels, you're going to have to focus for a long period of time to beat Flipull. It's one of those that you're going to have to sink your teeth into in order to get very far. Knowing when to go for the big combos and when to knock out single cubes is essential to grasp, and which cubes to leave alone. Generally, it's best not to take out the bottom row from above, as that leaves you with no remaining moves. You can keep going back to this time and again. The sound isn't too annoying, and the graphics don't get in the way, they do the job. It's really lacking a save feature, but that's pretty much the game's only flaw. The name is pretty stupid, I suppose, and the artwork, if you can call it that, has nothing to do with the game. The blurb on the back of the box actually says gnarliest. It occurs to me how strange it is to see that word in print, ensuring you'll have no danger in mistaking when this game was released. Tetris showed us how the most rudimentary of concepts can create a timeless masterpiece that transcends generations. I wouldn't say for a second that Flipull, an exciting cube game, falls into that latter category, but it holds its own in the genre, surpassing a lot of its competition. Tough, infuriating, captivating. All these things from the simplest concept you could imagine. Well done, Taito. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/portablepowerpodcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.